In October 1993, what was supposed to be a one-hour military raid in Somalia turned into one of the most intense urban battles in modern history. American elite forces were sent into Mogadishu, a city already destroyed by civil war, famine, and warlords, with a clear objective: capture key leaders of a powerful militia. The plan was fast, precise, and confident. But within minutes, the city fought back. Black Hawk helicopters were shot down, soldiers were trapped deep inside hostile streets, and thousands of armed fighters closed in from every direction. As night fell, a rescue mission became a fight for survival. Outnumbered, surrounded, and low on ammunition, American soldiers held their ground for hours, while others made impossible choices, some knowing they would not make it out alive. By sunrise, the world would wake up to shocking images, political fallout, and a battle that would change how wars were fought forever. This is not just a story of combat. It is a story of decisions made under fire, of courage in chaos, and of a city that turned a military operation into a defining moment in modern warfare. This is the Battle of Mogadishu. Act 1. A city already at war. Mogadishu did not collapse in a single moment. It unraveled slowly, violently, and in full view of a world that struggled to understand what was happening and, even more, how to respond. By the time American helicopters cut across the Somali sky in 1993, the city had already endured years of chaos, famine, and bloodshed. The Battle of Mogadishu was not an isolated clash, but the violent climax of a long descent that began well before the first Ranger fast roped into the city. In January 1991, the regime of President Mohamed Siad Barre, who had ruled Somalia since a military coup in 1969, finally collapsed. Barre's government, once backed by Cold War geopolitics, disintegrated under the pressure of clan-based insurgencies and economic ruin. When he fled Mogadishu, no unified authority replaced him. Instead, Somalia fractured into territories controlled by rival clans and militias, each led by warlords who drew power from kinship ties, weapons, stockpiles, and control of aid routes. What followed was a state of total institutional collapse. Somalia ceased to function as a nation-state. There was no central army, no police, no judiciary, and no effective government. In Mogadishu, heavily armed militias roamed freely, extorting civilians and fighting each other street by street. Among the most powerful of these leaders was General Mohamed Farrah Aidid, a former military officer who became a dominant figure within the Haber Gadir clan of the Hawiye alliance. Aidid was both feared and revered, seen by some as a nationalist resisting foreign interference, by others as a warlord profiting from chaos. By 1992, the violence had combined with drought and agricultural collapse to produce a catastrophic famine. International relief organizations estimated that over 300,000 Somalis died of starvation and disease, while millions more were displaced. Humanitarian aid existed, but much of it never reached civilians. Militias hijacked food convoys, looted warehouses, and used starvation as leverage against rival clans. The images shocked the world. Emaciated children, mass graves, and desperate refugees began appearing nightly on Western television screens. Under mounting international pressure, The United Nations authorized UNOSOM 1, United Nations Operation in Somalia 1, in April 1992. Its mandate was limited: monitor a ceasefire in Mogadishu and protect humanitarian deliveries. But with only a few thousand lightly armed peacekeepers and no enforcement authority, UNOSOM 1 proved incapable of stopping the violence. By late 1992, it was clear that humanitarian relief could not succeed without security. In December of that year, the United States led a multinational coalition under Operation Restore Hope, sanctioned by the UN as UNITAF. President George H.W. Bush framed the mission as purely humanitarian. American Marines landed on Somali beaches, cameras rolling, in a rare moment of optimism. For a brief time, the operation worked. Aid deliveries increased, famine conditions eased, and major supply routes were secured. But the underlying political reality remained unchanged. Dude, Somalia was still ruled by militias, not institutions. As UNITAF transitioned into UNOSOM 2 in May 1993, the mission's scope expanded dramatically. The UN now sought not only to protect aid, but to disarm factions, rebuild governance, and stabilize the country. This shift from humanitarian relief to nation building altered everything. Aidid, who had initially tolerated foreign forces, increasingly viewed UNOSOM 2 as a direct threat to his power. Tensions escalated rapidly. On June 5, 1993, Somali militiamen loyal to Aidid ambushed Pakistani UN peacekeepers in Mogadishu, killing 24 soldiers. The attack marked a turning point. The United Nations issued a warrant for Aidid's arrest, and the mission effectively became a manhunt. From that moment on, Mogadishu was no longer just a failed city. It was a battlefield defined by asymmetry. UN forces had superior technology, armor, and air power. Aidid's militia had numbers, local knowledge, and a population caught in the middle. Civilians were no longer just victims. Many were coerced or persuaded into supporting militia operations, whether by force, clan loyalty, or survival instinct. The United States, now under President Bill Clinton, found itself increasingly drawn into direct combat. American forces began conducting raids to capture Aidid's lieutenants using helicopters and elite units. Each operation fueled resentment among Somalis who saw foreign troops as occupiers rather than protectors. Radio broadcasts loyal to Aidid inflamed public anger, framing the UN as an enemy of Somali sovereignty. By late summer of 1993, Mogadishu was a city on edge. Roadblocks appeared overnight. Children served as lookouts. RPGs and AK-47s were everywhere. The streets learned the sound of helicopters and what followed them. What had begun as a mission to feed the hungry had transformed into a high-risk urban counterinsurgency, fought in narrow alleys and crowded markets. This was the environment into which Task Force Ranger would soon deploy. A city already conditioned by years of war, a population exhausted, armed, and divided, a warlord determined not to be taken alive, and an international mission whose goals had quietly shifted from relief to confrontation. The stage was set. Mogadishu was no longer collapsing. It had collapsed. What remained was a volatile vacuum waiting for a spark. If you're enjoying this deep dive into military history, subscribe to The Old Combatant. Hit that like button and share this video with fellow history and warfare enthusiasts. Your support keeps these stories alive. Act 2. The mission that was meant to last 1 hour. When Task Force Ranger arrived in Mogadishu in August 1993, its presence was meant to be decisive, surgical, and brief. Unlike the blue-helmeted peacekeepers of the United Nations, these soldiers were not there to negotiate, patrol, or deter. They were there to capture. Specifically, they were there for Mohamed Farrah Aidid, or failing that, the men who kept his organization alive. Task Force Ranger was an elite, temporary formation built around speed, precision, and overwhelming force. It included operators from 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR, the Night Stalkers, and support personnel from the U.S. Air Force and Navy. These were some of the most highly trained soldiers in the American military, many with combat experience from Panama and the Persian Gulf. Their mandate fell under Operation Gothic Serpent, a classified campaign aimed at dismantling Aidid's command structure. Rather than broad sweeps or long-term occupation, the strategy relied on rapid, daytime raids. Helicopters would insert Delta operators directly onto target buildings. Rangers would fast rope to secure the perimeter, detainees would be captured, and the force would extract before militia reinforcements could mobilize. On paper, it was a proven formula. Throughout August and September, Task Force Ranger conducted multiple missions in Mogadishu. Several of Aidid's associates were captured, but Aidid himself remained elusive. Each raid, however, increased Somali hostility. Crowds grew faster. RPG fire became more accurate. Intelligence reports began to warn that militias were adapting, learning helicopter flight paths, positioning shooters along likely routes, and stockpiling weapons in anticipation of a larger clash. Despite these warnings, operational tempo continued. The belief persisted that speed and surprise would compensate for the lack of armored support. Requests for M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles were denied by the Pentagon, which feared the political optics of heavy armor in a humanitarian mission. Task Force Ranger would rely on Humvees and helicopters alone. On the afternoon of October 3, 1993, intelligence identified a rare opportunity. Several of Aidid's top lieutenants, including Omar Salad Elmi and Abdi Hassan Awale Kabdid, were scheduled to meet at a building near the Bakara market, one of the most hostile areas of Mogadishu. The meeting location was known. The timing was confirmed. The window was narrow. The mission was approved. At approximately 3:30 p.m., helicopters lifted off from the airfield. The plan was straightforward and familiar. Delta operators would assault the target building. Rangers would secure 4 corners around the site. A ground convoy would move in to extract the prisoners and personnel. Estimated mission time, less than 1 hour. Few of the men involved believed it would be easy, but none expected what followed. As the helicopters approached the target, Somali spotters sounded the alarm. Crowds began to gather almost instantly. The assault itself went according to plan. The lieutenants were captured. The Rangers established their perimeter. But the city reacted faster than anticipated. Armed fighters flooded the streets, moving toward the sound of rotors and gunfire. Then, at 4:20 p.m., everything changed. An RPG struck Black Hawk Super 6-1, piloted by Cliff Walcott and Don Briley. The helicopter spun and crashed several blocks from the target site. Within minutes, another RPG hit Super 6-4, flown by Michael Durant, sending it down deep inside hostile territory. What had been a raid became a siege. Convoys attempting to reach the crash sites became lost in the maze-like streets, taking fire from rooftops and alleyways. Rangers and Delta operators were now fighting in multiple isolated positions, low on ammunition, surrounded by thousands of armed Somalis. Night was approaching. Communication grew fragmented, the assumption of a quick extraction evaporated. Mogadishu had sprung its trap not by grand design, but through momentum, rage, and adaptation. The very speed that had once protected Task Force Ranger now worked against it. There would be no clean exit, no easy victory. The battle for survival had begun. Act 3. Black Hawks down. The moment the first Black Hawk fell from the sky, Mogadishu transformed from a hostile city into a living battlefield. Smoke rose above the rooftops like a signal flare, drawing fighters, civilians, and opportunists toward the crash site. For the men on the ground, there was no confusion about what it meant. The mission was no longer about capture, it was about survival. Super 6-1, piloted by Cliff Walcott with co-pilot Don Briley, crashed violently after being hit by an RPG. Both pilots were killed on impact. Rangers and Delta operators immediately redirected toward the wreckage, establishing a defensive perimeter under relentless fire. Somali militiamen, many armed with AK-47s and RPGs, pressed in from all directions. Some were organized fighters loyal to Aidid. Others were armed civilians swept up by the chaos, drawn by anger, fear, or the promise of loot. Overhead, American helicopters continued to circle, firing miniguns and rockets in support. But the urban terrain worked against them. Narrow streets, dense buildings, and crowds made target identification nearly impossible. Every rooftop could hide an RPG gunner. Every alley could conceal an ambush. As commanders attempted to regain control of this situation, news arrived that a second helicopter, Super 6-4, had gone down. Piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant, it crashed deeper inside the city in an area even more hostile and difficult to reach. Now, there were two crash sites, separated by blocks of enemy-controlled streets. At the Super 6-4 site, the situation was catastrophic. Durant survived the crash but was severely injured. The crew chief and other personnel were wounded or killed. Somali fighters quickly converged, overwhelming the small number of Americans nearby. Two Delta Force snipers, Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shughart, made a decision that would define the battle's moral core. Repeatedly requesting permission to be inserted near the crash, Gordon and Shughart understood the reality. The ground convoy was delayed, and Durant would not survive without immediate protection. On their third request, permission was granted. They fast-roped from a helicopter into a storm of gunfire, fully aware they were entering a fight they were unlikely to leave alive. They fought with precision and discipline, holding off waves of attackers with rifles and pistols, dragging Durant to cover and defending the wreckage as ammunition dwindled. When they were finally overrun, both men were killed. Michael Durant was captured alive, becoming a prisoner of Aidid's militia. Back at the first crash site, Rangers and Delta operators fought through the night. Ammunition ran low, casualties mounted. Medics worked under fire, performing emergency procedures in the dirt. Communication with command was sporadic. The city seemed endless, hostile, and closing in. As darkness fell, Mogadishu belonged to the militias. Night fighting advantages meant little when surrounded. The sound of gunfire never stopped. Tracers cut through the blackness. American soldiers, trained for aggression and mobility, were now static, defending small pockets of ground, waiting for help that struggled to reach them. By midnight, it was clear that Task Force Ranger could not extract itself alone. What had been conceived as a one-hour operation had turned into an all-night urban battle against thousands of enemy fighters. The outcome would depend not on speed or surprise, but on endurance and on reinforcements that were still hours away. Act 4, the long night and the mile of survival. As October 3rd turned into October 4th, the battle entered its most desperate phase. American forces were scattered, wounded, and surrounded. The original ground convoy had failed to reach either crash site, disoriented by blocked streets, heavy fire, and poor visibility. Inside the command center at Mogadishu's airfield, officers made a difficult but necessary decision. International reinforcements would be required. Elements of the 10th Mountain Division, along with armored vehicles and troops from Pakistan and Malaysia, were assembled for a rescue column. Pakistani forces brought tanks. Malaysian units contributed armored personnel carriers. This multinational convoy would push into the city before dawn, fighting its way to the trapped Americans. Inside Mogadishu, Rangers held defensive positions through the night. Snipers fired from rooftops. Machine gunners covered intersections. Wounded soldiers waited in pain and shock, some bleeding for hours before evacuation was possible. The men fought not for ground or objectives, but for time. At first light, the rescue convoy finally entered the city. Progress was slow and violent. Somali fighters attacked relentlessly, firing RPs and small arms from buildings and crudes. Several Malaysian APCIs were disabled. Pakistani tanks returned fire with heavy cannons, their presence alone shocking in the narrow streets. Eventually, the convoy reached the first crash site. Survivors were loaded onto vehicles under fire. Some soldiers had to be left temporarily as space ran out. When the convoy reached the second site, it found only wreckage and confirmation that Durant had been taken. As the column withdrew, it became clear that not everyone could be carried out. A decision was made that would later become legendary. Those who could not fit onto vehicles would run. What followed became known as the Mogadishu Mile. Rangers and Delta operators, exhausted and wounded, sprinted through hostile streets toward a UN-controlled stadium, covering nearly a mile under sporadic fire. There was no cover, no air support, no guarantee of survival, only momentum and trust in the men running beside them. By mid-morning on October 4th, the battle was over. 18 American soldiers were dead. More than 70 were wounded. Malaysian and Pakistani forces also suffered casualties. Somali losses were far higher. Estimates range from several hundred to over 1,000 killed, but exact numbers remain disputed. The battlefield fell silent, but the consequences were only beginning. Act 5, Shockwaves and Withdrawal. Images from Mogadishu traveled faster than official reports. Video footage of dead American soldiers being dragged through the streets by crowds shocked the United States and the world. For many Americans, it was the first time since Vietnam that the cost of intervention appeared so raw and public. The political impact was immediate. President Bill Clinton, facing intense pressure, announced that U.S. combat forces would withdraw from Somalia by March 1994. Aidid, the original target of the operation, remained at large. Michael Durant, held captive for 11 days, was released through negotiations involving Somali clan elders and the International Committee of the Red Cross. His survival was one of the few bright points in an otherwise devastating episode. Within military circles, the battle sparked deep reflection. Questions were raised about intelligence failures, the denial of armored support, rules of engagement, and the challenges of urban warfare against irregular forces. The U.S. military began revising doctrine, training, and equipment, lessons that would later shape operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. For Somalia, the outcome was grim. UNOSOM II eventually collapsed. Foreign forces withdrew. The country remained fractured, and Mogadishu continued to suffer decades of instability. The battle had ended, but its shadow stretched far into the future. Act 6, Legacy, Memory, and Meaning. In 1999, journalist Mark Bowden published Black Hawk Down, a meticulously researched account based on interviews with soldiers, commanders, and Somali witnesses. The book reframed the battle not as a failure of courage, but as a collision between political ambition and battlefield reality. 2 years later, Ridley Scott's film adaptation brought the battle into popular culture. While praised for realism and intensity, it also sparked debate, particularly over its limited portrayal of Somali perspectives and civilians. Within military history, the Battle of Mogadishu became a case study taught in war colleges around the world. It reshaped how nations approached peacekeeping, intervention, and counterinsurgency. The phrase, "another Mogadishu," entered political vocabulary, symbolizing the risks of unclear missions and limited public tolerance for casualties. For the soldiers who fought there, the battle was neither symbol nor lesson. It was lived experience. Names like Gordon and Shughart became synonymous with sacrifice. Others carried wounds, physical and invisible, long after leaving Somalia. Mogadishu itself endured, scarred but alive. It stands as a reminder that wars rarely end when battles do, and that history is often written not by plans, but by what happens when those plans collide with reality. For more uncompromising military history and real stories from the battlefield, subscribe to The Old Combatant, leave a like, and share this video. These stories matter, and they deserve to be remembered.